This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. When Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was picked to be Kamala Harris's running mate, all of America scrambled to answer the same question. Who is Tim Walz? We didn't find our answers in the places one might have expected decades ago, like the flagship newspaper. While other truth-tellers were reporting on Tim Walz's stolen valor, the Minnesota Star-Tribune was playing defense for Walz. When I needed the truth on Tim Walz, I didn't go to the Star-Tribune. I went to reporters like Liz Collin and outlets like Alpha News, which are still free to report the facts. It's my pleasure today to invite on Liz Collin to the Enjoyer Podcast. Liz, thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So Liz, I know you're up there in Minnesota. I'm not sure if you have any Michigan in your background, or ever been here or anything like that. So we always start off this way. What do you enjoy about Michigan? And if you've not been here, what do you admire about Michigan?
Michigan, I've been there many times. You know, you guys are kind of the frozen tundra right there with us. My husband snowmobiles, I know, there every year.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, lovely area. You guys have some of the same political issues as us, it seems, as well. So
same media issues.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I've done many interviews, and they talk about how they would rather live in, Detroit at this point than Minneapolis, because that was always the one that stood out. But I know there's been a lot of revitalization. We're still waiting for that here. But we've had a lot of Michigan transplants over this way who are even looking to go back. If that tells you anything about the climate we're living in now. Things
must be bleak.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, what do you enjoy about our pleasant peninsula?
Yeah, I think the scenery is lovely there. It's kind of similar. I mean, I would say we're pretty similar in what we're doing here in Minnesota. Have you been to Minnesota? Can I ask you that? I know that you're interviewing me, but can I interview you, James?
I have not. I have not been there. But I do know the land of 10,000 lakes. I do know that much. And it's funny because I live in Oakland County, Michigan, which itself is kind of the land of 10,000 lakes. It's all inland. There's no, Lake St. Clair connected to it, but there's 1,000 little lakes. And so many people are able to live on a lake up here that it is. Like, I actually had a friend who moved to Oakland County from Mankato.
Oh,
my senior year.
Okay.
And he used to always talk about the similarities. So from what I understand, you guys it's a little colder up there, but it feels like a kindred spirit I'm talking to.
Yeah, I love Mackinac Island. I've done a couple trips there. That's okay. A lovely, lovely area. And I like to say that we're actually from the land of 10,000 lies, which I know is exactly what we're getting into today, James.
Absolutely. So Liz, you've seen Tim Walz up close for many years now. You've seen the character, you've seen the things that don't necessarily make it to national. What would you have America know about the Tim Walz character?
Gosh, it's a lot. It's a loaded question for sure. I'll just set the stage a bit just to let people know I'm from Minnesota. This is where I was born and grew up. I kind of climbed the corporate media ladder, moving all around the country, but I landed back home at the station that I grew up watching as a kid, the CBS affiliate in Minneapolis, where I was a longtime anchor, investigative reporter. And I've been covering Tim Walz in that time. That was 15 years that I did my stint there. And I've been over in independent media now for a few years. And I can actually tell the truth about this guy now, which is quite refreshing. But he's been governor for 6 years in Minnesota. And I've just never seen, I know I've mentioned the lies, but so many radical policies that have been put in place, really dividing the state in a way that I have not seen before. And we are kind of a passive aggressive, that's kind of what Minnesota nice. I kind of say, are we Minnesota naive rather than Minnesota nice? But I can't really believe that, so many have fallen for this guy. But I do think that the tide is turning really in the sense that, James, we have a very dishonest media here. And that was something that I saw in my time in corporate media. Not so much what we were telling the public, but what we were not. And so many stories that had to do with Tim Walz that were withheld from the public. And I know we're going to get into a lot of that, whether it's stolen valor, we have IVF, we have his DUI. I mean, there's a long, it's almost like every single day. And I will say that I'm a bit relieved that the national press has put on this pressure now, because it just wasn't happening on a local level. And sadly, I don't think the voters in Minnesota were really educated on who Tim Walz really is.
Right. What do you make of that? I mean, I predicted the exact same thing would happen. Would it have been Gretchen Whitmer, where the Nationals would come in, and not only are you vetting Whitmer at that point, but your start point in the vetting process is the published stories about her. And I think that the Nationals would be alarmed by how much fawning coverage there is and how little actually a critical look has ever been taken on Whitmer. I think they would look at someone like Whitmer and see a blue ocean, just like Walz, where there's all this stuff that was out there, publicly available. The dots were readily connectable, but who was going to do it in Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk a little bit about this stolen valor issue that came up very quickly because of the national attention. That's not because, I mean, we weren't trying for a long time, but I actually sat down with Command Sergeant Major Tom Behrens. He is the man that took Walz's place on that deployment to Iraq. And in kind of a series of stories we did a couple of years ago when he was running for governor again, these 3 command sergeant majors came forward in these stories to say, he's been using this CSM rank that he did not attain. He's a retired master sergeant. This is all well documented. This
was out years ago.
Years ago, we broke the story and gave that light. And I thought, well, gosh, this is a great story. We have a 3-part series. This will certainly get attention. And it got him dead to rights. It was quashed. I mean, it was unbelievable to me that no one really in the corporate media touched it. And if they did, they couched the story, James, which is so interesting to me. I know you've talked about the Star Tribune. That's Minnesota's largest newspaper here, which I also like to point out that the CEO was a commissioner of Tim Walz at one point. Isn't that interesting? That's never happened across the country in any newspapers before, that they've basically installed the PR person.
That's incredible.
Yeah, of Walz to run the largest newspaper in the state. So anyway, if they would report on this issue, they would say Republican candidate for governor who never served, questions Walz's military service. Well, that's not the story. Right. The story is the fact that he's using this rank he did not attain. And the story is also that he bailed on his unit, the highest ranking non-commissioned officer, before this deployment. So it's really wild to me how the media manipulated that story.
And that's exactly how they do, is they, even if they cover it, they'll do something like that.
Yep.
That they'll introduce a new piece of evidence that's unrelated, or they'll find a way to explain it away and exonerate it. But it's never just the thing. Right.
Or it's a Republican. They always make it about Republicans.
Republicans pounce.
Yes.
So it sounds like this got Republicans pounced.
Yep.
And this guy doesn't even have the idea that a citizen can't question the truth or falsehood of a story just because the person telling it is military related. That's not America as I know it to be. So the premise there is just so off. Mm-hmm. But how many readers of mainstream media, how many graduates of public schools are going to connect that many dots?
Yeah, and you have, now so many things coming to light with videos. He's using this rank. There's a challenge coin he was giving out as a congressman, saying he was a command sergeant major. And that's the thing, too. I don't actually know how the vetting process went down, because you wouldn't really be able to find these stories about Walz. I mean, Alpha News, where I work now, I encourage people to check out our content, alphanews.org, or follow us on X, Alpha News MN, the MN for Minnesota. But our stories aren't going to come up on Google. It's not the way it works.
You've been blacked out.
They want to control that narrative. For sure. So I don't actually know if this information was really out there. And these guys actually came out even before, our stories. They were writing, James, to Walz in Congress saying, hey, you have to stop using this rank. They went directly to him. They didn't use
Wow.
the media in the beginning. But
They
the fact
tried to
this went
hash
on
it
for
out veteran to veteran.
yes, yes. And he just ignored them. So this has gone on for decades. This
Wow.
isn't something. And then we even saw at the DNC how his wife referred to him as a retired command sergeant major. I noticed in his speech, though, he did not talk about that and many other things that he's lied about over the years. But that's been interesting, too.
Yeah. Talk about your life. Paint the picture. I read your book as well, and I saw The Fall of Minneapolis.
Oh, thank you.
Your book was kind of, about your journey and how this whole George Floyd reality affected your life. Fall of Minneapolis is about how pretty much every leader from Mayor Jacob Frey to Tim Walz, every person in charge threw gas on the fire and did things, made orders for the police that destabilized rather than stabilized the situation. Help us understand your life in 2019, Liz Collin, and that world versus right now.
Yeah. So I'll just say I love talking about myself. I'm kidding. But my story, I think, does, make sense into how this all came about. Because I will say that I grew up with a dream of being a television reporter. This is what I wanted to do, share other people's stories, find facts, get at the truth. And now it's kind of this.
You started very young, right?
I actually started a newspaper when I was 10.
Right.
I really was obsessed with the news which makes me sound super cool. I know.
Yeah, who does
but
that?
We now live in a time where it's, there's your truth or my truth. And it's actually just the truth. Like, I don't know how we got all twisted up in this world. But I could see how, corporate media turned into that, helping to push these narratives that were not supported by fact. And so in 2019, I'm, kind of living the dream, I guess. I, was the highest rated weekend anchor in the Twin Cities. I had won a bunch of Emmy Awards. My reporting helped to change laws in Minnesota. I was a familiar face in Minnesota television. People like that. You're from here, and then you're, on TV, and they trust you. And, that's something I took very seriously. And did a lot of long form reporting, stories that, I considered, that they mattered to people and we, informing the public. But I really saw this change, James, with COVID. So much information and I never considered myself, some right wing lunatic or something that I've now painted into. I really wasn't even a political person at all. I mean, I really believed
I still don't think you are.
Yeah, that's the thing. You get, if you care about the truth or investigating certain stories, then you become, you're labeled as that. And it's so strange to me. I really have been a lifelong journalist. It's kind of how I consider myself. But I was married to several years to the police union president in Minneapolis. He was serving as a Lieutenant Bob Kroll. He's, since retired for a few years. Still, everything is his fault, which is really amazing to me. But he was always very outspoken and, pushed back against a lot of the community activists in Minneapolis, a lot of people that it seemed were, and somebody that I think that the media still gives up, puts on a pedestal. A lot of these groups that are making millions of dollars off this defund the police movement. They say they haven't defunded the police, James. You probably know they completely have. They're demoralized, and it's totally different now. But, he's on a board of 10 people. I went to my boss before we even went on a date to tell him that I was going to do that. I never reported on Minneapolis police issues due to that.
Right.
But he was serving in that position when the George Floyd incident happened. So obviously I had a, unique perspective. And that's kind of how the book came to be. I just really chronicled everything because I couldn't believe how we were just going with this. We were just going with this is the most racist murder in police history, a black man being murdered by a white cop in the middle of the street while everybody's recording. And meanwhile, they're withholding the body camera footage from the public. That's never happened before. Meanwhile, they take down the police training manual, the 2 pages that have to do with the MRT. Meanwhile, we're not allowed to even focus on George Floyd's autopsy. That's also withheld from the public for days. Meanwhile, the FBI is called in within just a few hours of his death. I mean, I could go on and on about how this case was so much manipulated.
Yes.
And also, I just couldn't believe the lack of leadership we were seeing to just burn down 1,500 businesses or destroy them. and just go along with that. And this is supposed to be, how we're changing language in the news. We can't use the term riots, setting mandates for skin color of who we're going to interview. I mean, it was just crazy to me that this is what was happening in the wake, and nobody cared about the truth.
What is the truth? If you could kind of paint the picture for me, how does the average person, would you say, view the George Floyd situation? And what is the truth as you know it to be?
Well, yeah, I encourage people. My book is called They're Lying, The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd. You can find it just on Amazon. But that's what then led to my documentary called The Fall of Minneapolis. That's something you can watch for free, thefallofminneapolis.com. It's also on Rumble and YouTube.
You should sell that, by the way.
We kind of believe in the truth being free. I know it's kind of maybe that's not very good as far as longevity in news or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, luckily, I think there's 11 million views or something like that. This Tim Walz thing gave it a bit more gas. So it's been amazing. So please share it. And I will say Facebook certainly doesn't like it. But beyond that, we've been safe because no one has yet to disprove anything in there, and that I think is quite telling as well. But you as I was talking about with the incident itself, so much was kept from the public, including and that's why we start the Fall of Minneapolis with the body camera footage, which almost speaks for itself. You have George Floyd, who's not complying. Clearly, there's something going on with this guy. The officers are asking, what are you on? What did you take? And, nothing. He's talking, he's lying from the beginning about being shot by police the last time. And there's almost a carbon copy arrest that took place nearly a year earlier where he's using these same excuses.
That part
and
I
saying
couldn't
the exact
believe.
same thing.
It's how similar it was to the previous incident.
Yes, almost a carbon copy. But you have these two rookie cops on the job for 3 days and 4 days, and Thomas Lane and Alex King, who respond. And they're very nice to the guy. If you watch this with somebody who knows a thing or two about policing, giving him a chance to really tell his story of what's going on. Meanwhile, he's dropping a baggie of drugs on the street, shoving things in his mouth. There's things in the back of his car that came out months later. But again, we're not allowed to know any of that in the beginning. Right. None of that. Instead, you have people like Governor Walz making this all about race, fanning the flames. At one point, he wanted all school children in Minnesota. There was a proclamation that they needed to take 9 minutes of silence for George Floyd. This is something he pushed on our kids, and made this. He still actually issued that proclamation. I encourage people to look that up. Even just recently, again, on the 4-year, what he calls the anniversary of George Floyd's murder, being the first leader also to use that term murder. Wow. Well, nobody does that. I mean, this is before the autopsy is complete or anything.
No facts to go on.
No, exactly. But I really think that this was his moment. Remember, this was the last presidential election with ousting Trump at all costs, creating chaos.
Right.
Also, encouraging people to protest during the COVID lockdowns that, he had mandated before. And nobody in the media saying, wait a minute, I thought everybody was supposed to, stay home. But he's saying it's totally fine to go out and protest. During that time. And more than anything, also with Walz, withholding the National Guard for as long as he did as this all went on. And again, making this all about race when Alex King, the black police officer, arrests George Floyd and leaves that out. A lot of people, I think, even before the documentary came out, they didn't even know these other 3 officers went to prison. They didn't even know the facts of the case because it was so manipulated. You have George Floyd talking about how he can't breathe before Derek Chauvin is even on scene. Thomas Lane calling for an ambulance 36 seconds after George Floyd himself asks to be laid on the ground. You have a problematic ambulance response that they admit to on camera that they, didn't come right away. So many things we didn't know, we weren't allowed to know. And people should wonder why that is. Are you okay with our government, doing this? I mean, I guess that's, kind of the point of the documentary and why I think it's important to even talk about it to this day.
Among your colleagues in the Minnesota media, did you see a search for truth?
No, not at all. I mean, we really have what I would consider activists more than journalists. We you watch it on the local news now. They're hiring people younger and younger.
Absolutely.
There's not a lot of seasoned veterans left, I feel like. And so it's different because they've been ingrained, and this is kind of part of the ideology they grew up with. For example, I've talked about before how in the reporting back then, you were allowed to use the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And I said, this is a Marxist, it's a political organization, was my argument then. That's well documented. Why that would be the same as, us using the hashtag Trump 2020, or to me, I was just like, this is crazy. Why would we allow this at a, media level?
We don't have to spread their message. We can just quote them.
Right. But using the hashtag in your report, to me, that was crazy. And again, very telling, because a lot of the reporters, I think, now really believe this stuff in their heart. It's hard for them to look at this in a fact-based way.
Another thing I thought was so interesting about Tim Walz, a lot of people have hit him on the stolen valor, but the thing I thought was interesting is his role in changing the state flag.
Yeah.
You have a design that dates back to 1893. It depicts, different races able to get along and at least coexist in a primitive time in the state's history. I think it's beautiful in its own way. And I think Tim Walz's problem with it is that it shows different types of people able to get along who didn't need Tim Walz to bring them together. They somehow were able to figure it out. They didn't need hashtags. They didn't need a coexist bumper sticker. They were somehow able to live alongside each other, and it was okay. What did you make of this push for the new state flag?
Yeah, this was what I think is so interesting. Also, these are basically people installed by Walz, his people, so to say that this was a nonpartisan group of people that came together. They never voted on this. They never went to, people in Minnesota. There was just kind of these backdoor meetings with a few people making this decision. Many people have pointed out some similarities to Somalia in the
striking
flag.
Similarities.
Yes, which I think if you just take a look, you can make that decision for yourself. And Minnesota is home to the largest Somali population in the country.
What a coincidence.
But this is so much about this guy. Again, you'll see this image, kind of this caricature, this flannel dressed. He's wearing a camo hat. I just think this is so funny. This moderate. He's really anything but. If you take a look at his track record in Minnesota, and so that's why I always say don't really fall for this. I was even watching his speech. It's kind of just like opposite day with so many of the things that he's mentioning. He really cares about kids not being shot in school, right? Well, he had a hand in not allowing SROs, school resource officers, in Minnesota schools because he's very anti-cop, anti-police.
That's defunding the police.
Yeah, that's been his background. So, don't fall for that. Meanwhile, we have kids literally holding people at gunpoint in Minneapolis over and over again, as there's been, I think it's 4,500 stolen vehicles this year in Minneapolis, if you could even imagine.
Not even
that.
September yet.
Yeah, and there were so few of carjackings before, they never even kept track of them in Minneapolis. And now this is what's happening on this guy's watch. He's not mentioning, he was lying about the IVF thing that his wife went through, IUI. I noticed you backed off of that. This whole mind your own damn business. We're hearing about that. Well, he meddles in everyone's business.
Didn't he send the National Guard? He was fine calling the National Guard for COVID control. I remember seeing the video of the guardsmen walking down a street, shooting people who were standing on their porch during stay-home orders.
Yeah, he went ahead and, and this is like day 5. So keep in mind that, first of all of this should not be going on at day 5 anyway. But I think that, he came to the point with the riot, so gosh, I better do something. So then they were enforcing their curfew orders, which they finally had on the books. So that's where some of that video comes from. But again, after telling people to go out and protest, just do so safely and wear a mask. And then, maybe you should stop burning some buildings down on day 5. So we'll enforce the curfew order. So it's really just wild to me. We have homeless encampments all over Minneapolis now, several homicides tied to that. I think murder rates this year are up 30% over last year. And so this stretch of time since George Floyd will be the most homicides on record ever in Minneapolis history consecutively. And this is even when, back in the 90s during the whole crack epidemic, and that was referred to as Murderapolis. And it's way worse now. with the homicide rate. So again, when you're seeing this guy, even what he's doing on stage is so strange. He's never done this before, jumping around and these waving and then these coach signs that you see in the audience. It's amazing to me. I mean, he hasn't coached football in 22 years. He was a ninth grade coach in Nebraska, and then he was an assistant coach at a high school in Mankato. Right. But they're treating him like he was a D1 football.
You would think he was Bear Bryant the way they talk about this guy.
It's so weird.
Just the makeover in almost no time, based on almost no truth, is kind of incredible. We talked about the media. The media in both of our states, I think, has the same problem. And I actually traced this problem to Donald Trump in Michigan. And I think across the country, a lot of people were taken by surprise by what happened in 2016, and they were embarrassed by what happened. They told all their friends that Donald Trump could never win, and then he won. And I think the media came to be blamed in the aftermath of that. You ran too many press conferences. You talked about Hillary Clinton's emails too much. You told too much truth, essentially. And I think a mentality set in where across the country, people said, I don't want to be complicit in anything that would help Donald Trump, right? Then in 2020, especially in Michigan, you have the fake kidnapping with Gretchen Whitmer. You have Trump calling Whitmer that woman from Michigan. I think the media took on kind of a we're all in this together mentality, where they stopped covering Democrats and they started covering for them. What do you see, and kind of when did it start out in Minnesota?
Yeah, I think your timing is spot on, James. I mean, even just I covered Trump the last time around, and this is when you even saw. So he came to Minneapolis, for example, at the Target Center. It was where he spoke in that election, and they had some protests outside. There were Antifa members, and the media made it seem as if it was Trump supporters being violent outside.
Right.
That was kind of how it was.
Bizarro
framed.
world.
It's so weird. And it's actually interesting that at the time, some Minneapolis police officers came forward and they said, we haven't done a lot of riot training recently. And they raised the flag that, hey, if there's something on a large scale, we're going to be in trouble. And this was, essentially 2 years before Floyd, that they were even sounding alarms that, and those went unanswered because instead the mayor was focused on getting rid of warrior training because it sounds really bad, among the Minneapolis police force, and, going after things that are just, and that's what I tried to lay out in the book. There's a lot more about that, just how, the mayor would meet, for example, with the police union behind the scenes saying, we like the cops. I'm going to give you guys even 400 more police officers. So that would be, they would have 1,500 cops at this point. Now they have less than 500, just for people keeping score at home. But he would say that behind the scenes, but I don't want you guys on my side, but this is what I'm going to push for. And then with Floyd, it was like everything changed just like that. And what I say too about the media, James, is all of this information was there. It wasn't like I'm making this up. These are stories that my husband's telling me. No, these are all stories that were well done. Everybody always covered contract negotiations and things that were happening. But all of a sudden it was like it just disappeared. And we have to go along with this narrative that the cops are horrible people and racists. This is the thing we have to do. And it was kind of like this runaway train. And I could see the writing on the wall. I mean, this has happened elsewhere. This isn't the first time. If you look at Ferguson and the lies that were told there, and, all of this anti-law enforcement.
Hands up, don't shoot.
Fake. The sentiment peddled by the public, peddled by the press, and it gets in the public's head.
And by the time the real facts come out, no one cares what's true anymore.
Yeah, it's too late. Yeah.
I'll get you out of here on this one, Liz. I see in Minnesota, looking from afar, I see kind of this crisis of masculinity. I mean, we obviously have one in Michigan. Our top office holders in Michigan are all women. Obviously, men are irrelevant in Michigan. But then I look at Minnesota, and I see Tim Walz. I see a sassy, chubby man. I look at Jacob Frey. I see a frail man.
He's a good dancer, James, though. You seen that?
I've seen him. I've seen attempts at busting a move. I can't credit it. I can't say he busted it. I did see attempts toward this. We've heard about the Minnesota Vikings, the Conquerors.
Yeah.
Where are those guys, and how come Minnesota is being represented by these guys?
Well, that's what I think is so. Sorry, that's a great question. So funny too. You have Fry, who's basically handpicked from Virginia. I think that's where he's from, to run for city council in Minneapolis. No ties to Minnesota.
He's a carpetbagger.
Yeah, you have.
We have all kinds of carpet. Mallory McMorrow, who was just on the DNC, came here from Jersey or something like that. Was just totally shipped in to be a politician.
Yeah. They're just picked.
Wow.
You have Walz, same thing. He's from Nebraska. He's not from here. You have our attorney general, allegedly, the highest ranking law enforcement officer in the state of Minnesota. That guy's from Michigan. You can have him back if you'd like. But
we actually had built a wall to keep Keith Ellison out of Michigan. Yeah,
but these very radical people that are transforming Minnesota that really are not from here. And that's what's funny. My husband always is blamed as, they were the occupying force. I mean, he came all the way from St. Paul, Minnesota, to be a cop in Minneapolis.
Right.
Well, that's just miles apart. But yeah, that's and that's also identity politics. These people love that. They love race. They love the sexism. They love all of this, and that's what has been peddled by Walz as well.
What's going to happen in Minnesota in November? I mean, I saw a story after Walz that would be unthinkable in Michigan. If it had been Gary Peters or Gretchen Whitmer, you wouldn't have Michigan Republicans saying, "Oh, I think we can win Michigan." But Minnesota Republicans were telling the Star Tribune that after Walz. Yeah. Is it possible that Minnesota could be lost by the Democrats?
Well, what's interesting is, we've now been portrayed, especially with this Walz thing, that we're a, blue state. Right. I mean, look at them out. Not even close. There's like a couple blue dots. And even, they had the DFL trifecta this year with the governor and the House and Senate. But, those races, some of them were lost by single digits. And so it's very much in play. And they actually think the Republicans think this Walz thing has helped them because nobody really knew of the danger and the damages done. This last legislative session was just
That's
wild,
incredible.
With so many radical policies that Alpha News pushed out there. But finally, it's just getting the coverage that they say it deserved all along.
Liz, I want to thank you so much. Is there anything else you would have people know about Minnesota, about Alpha News, about yourself, about the fight for truth?
Yeah, if people would like to follow me, I'm Liz Collin on X. So LizCollin, no S. It's okay. Now I've been called worse things rather than Liz Collins. But so Liz Collin, and then Alpha News MN is a great place on X. We've done a ton of stories. Who is Tim Walz? We're really, honestly, the only media in Minnesota that has brought so much of this to light, and we have been for years. This isn't new for us. And I will say also, we have had so many new tips come in as a result of him being named. So we're uncovering things really every day. So I ask people to tune in there. alphanews.org is our website. You can sign up for our free newsletter, and we just send you things directly to your inbox if you want our daily stories there. But I also have a podcast, Liz Collin Reports. James, maybe I'll have you on.
Please have me on. I would love to go on and talk about what has been done to our states and our media. But yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks for fighting the good fight too, James. It was great to talk to you. Really appreciate you having me.
Liz, I really appreciate you taking the time, and just please do me one favor, Liz, please. If you make another documentary,
yes,
sell that one.
Okay.
Sell this one. Put it on Amazon. Let me give you $7 for it.
Okay. That's there was talk of like, should we just charge $1? And I was like, nobody wants to pay. This is, and the thing is that I really just believe in this. We need to get this out
powerful.
there. And I think that, that's what we got to do.
It's powerful, but you should be compensated for it because it's great work. Liz, thank you so much.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.